Okay, hello everybody, welcome to this part of the presentation, which is the intro to Python. And today I am working on Ubuntu. If you have Windows, if you have Mac, you're going to have to install Python on there. And I, right now, will be using Python version 3.6.4. Now, I could just go and type Python and use the interpreter here, but I want to do something a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of that, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the IPython interpreter, which allows just as much interactivity, but it also, of course, allows you to get a little bit better code highlighting and some other additional features. So here we are in IPython. Again, you see it's the Anaconda version. And what this allows you to do is just go right in and write Python. So for example, I want to tell you guys that this is a comment. This is a comment. Okay, and a comment is not going to be executed. A comment is simply just going to be something that someone can read and say, oh, okay, that's a comment. So the first thing I want to talk about is strings. Strings are a type of variable in Python, and there's a lot of things you can do with strings. So let's say that we have a string. We have a string called name, and we want that name to be John Smith. Okay, and that is great. That's wonderful, but it's not really interesting, right? We have John Smith. If I go ahead and write the name, then that just prints John Smith. Doesn't really, it's not very interesting. So let's kick it up a notch. Let's say that I want to find out how many words there are in this name. Well, it's pretty easy to do. I'm going to call name. I'm going to hit the dot, and I'm going to write split. Let's see what that does. So that is awesome. This is so cool. So we've taken a string name John Smith, and using the split operator, I've actually broken it up into two words, and the words are contained inside of a list. Okay, so that's a very important thing. Is now we have three different things we've learned. Right, we can make comments in Python. We can create string variables, and we can use the split function to turn the string into a list of words. Now, here's what's cool. Now, if I go to name, it's still John Smith, right? So what happened to that list? Well, the thing is, I actually made that change in place, but I didn't actually change the original variable. So when I called split on name, it simply showed me the result as if it changed the value of name, but it doesn't actually change the value, it just simply outputs the result. Now, what I can do if I want to make that permanent is I would say, for example, words in name equal name dot split, and let's see what that does. So if I say give me words in name John Smith, right? Now that's a step further. That's a step in the direction we want to go for. So we know that words in name is a list, but do we know for sure? Well, if you want to know for sure what something is in Python, what you have to do is use type and then words in name, and watch what that does. List. We can do that with other things too. Let's go type name is a string, right? So those are two sort of types that we have, right? We have a list and a string. That's great. But what if we want a number? What if we want a birth date, right? Or let's make it birth year. Okay, so the birth year is 1945, right? Now, if I do type on this, I wonder what's going to happen. So let's see what happens here. So, okay, that's an integer. All right, so we have lists, we have strings, we have integers. This is great. This is getting more interesting, okay? Already with this, there is a bunch that we can do. There's a bunch we can do. And let's go forward and let's see what we can do. So first, let's go to the list. Okay, so we have the list, which is called words and names. So let's figure out how long that list is. Now, of course, it's easy because there's two, we can count it. But let's say we couldn't count it. We don't know. So we can actually use something called the length operator. And we do length words in name 2. Okay, that tells us that there are 2 words in that name. That's pretty cool. Okay, what else can we do? All right, so there's something else. So we've learned about strings, integers, and lists. And that's all fine and dandy. But I also want to tell you about something else that you can do with lists, which is you can do list comprehensions. Okay, and list comprehensions are pretty interesting because list comprehensions allow you to kind of get a lot out of very little. So just follow along with me for now. Let's say you have another list, a list of numbers, and it looks like this: 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. Okay, you got this list of numbers, and that's all fine and dandy. But let's say that you wanted to create a new list where you took the list of numbers, and for every number in that list, you added the number 3. What would you do? So I would say, for example, I would create something called numbers plus 3 equals, and then watch this. I'm going to create a list, but it's going to be different. So I'm going to say num for num in numbers. Actually, no, sorry. Num plus 3 for num in numbers. And then I'm doing this. I'm saying I want to take a list comprehension and assign it to the value numbers plus 3. And inside that list comprehension, I want to take for every single number in numbers, I want to add 3 to that number. And I want to return all of that as a list. Let's see what happens. Okay, so nothing happened. Of course, something happened, but it assigned it to the value numbers plus 3. Okay, whoa, that's cool. So it took the list numbers 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and it did some math, and now we have 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. Now that's cool. We got this list of numbers, and that's handy. But what if I want to figure out like the total value of all those numbers, right? So what I do is I use something called sum, and I say numbers plus 3. Let's see what that does. 56. That's pretty cool. Okay. What about if I want to figure out the largest number? So I'm going to do max numbers plus 3. Boom. What if I want to figure out the smallest number? That's right, you guessed it. Minimum numbers plus 3. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so now, just to review, we've talked about comments, strings, integers, list comprehensions, right? And then we talked about sum, min, and max. Pretty amazing. Okay, so we're definitely going in the right direction with this. All right, great. So let's go ahead and continue. And so we know a lot of things that we can do here with Python, but this is just the very total beginning of the possibilities. The next thing I want to do is I want to try to work with sort of the things that we've learned with strings. So I want to go back to name. We have John Smith. Let's say I want to get the first letter of name. Well, what I would do is I would put the number 0 in brackets, for example. And this tells Python that I want the absolute first character of the variable name. Of course, we know what that's going to be. That is going to be the letter J, right? That is the letter J. So Python starts counting from 0, right? So Python starts from 0. So in Python, the first position of any list or item or number or variable is going to be 0. Okay, so make sure that you understand that. That is very important. That's one of those first things that everybody should learn about Python, is that the most important or first number is first item is always 0. Okay, so we got name. And we know that name here it happens to start with J. but we don't know what, for example, the initials are. So if we wanted to get the initials of name, one thing that we could do is remember that we had list comprehension. So let's say we create a new one. We're going to call it initials. And we're going to say that for name 0 in name 0 for name in names. Yes, okay. Word 0 for word in name dot split, right? So we're going to split the name into the words. For each of the words, we're going to just take the first letter and we're going to turn that into initials. Let's see what that does, if that worked. And I call it, and what do I have? I have the initials J and S from John Smith. Okay, so we continue on. So that is something you can do. Now also, you can call the last item of something, of different objects. That's done a little different way. So let's say that we want the last letter in the name John Smith. So what we do is we do name brackets -1, square brackets of course, and that is going to give us H. Okay, so in Python, when we want the last item of something, we actually, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and writing in 7, and we want the 7th element, or the last element rather, then we just type in -1. That's going to give us the last element. Now what's cool and interesting and yet obvious, right, is if we want the second to last element, then let's see what happens. If we do -2, what happens? We get T, which is the second last element. That's cool, that's fun, that's nice. But what if we want to do something else? What if I want the first 3 elements, right? That's something else I can do too. So I start at 0, and I do a colon, and then if I want the first 3 letters, that's going to be 0, 1, 2. Now remember, when you use this form in Python, I can't type in the number 2, because if I type in the number 2, it's not going to give me the last element. So when you specify the elements in this fashion, you have to add 1 to the last element. So if I want 0, 1, 2, I have to give 3, and that should give me the first 3 characters. It did, it worked. Okay, so that's another thing. So basically what we learned is that we can call the first item in a list using 0, the last item using -1, and a set of items using this form. So we're going to say x, x. So xx is basically the, in fact, I'll say like this, the start and the end, right? Okay, so that's cool. So we know how to sort of work with lists now, which is nice. It's nice that we can work with lists, but we have strings, we have lists. Let's play around with integers. Let's see what we can do with integers. We haven't done a lot with integers yet. So let's create a number. And let's say that number is 23,456. And if we put it out, okay, we got number there. What if I want to divide the number? Well, that's pretty easy. We take number divided by 2, and we have that, okay? Now, the thing is, when you use the division operator, it's always going to be a float. Let me just show you. Let me prove that to you. So say new number equals number divided by 2, and I'm going to say, what is the type for new number? And it is a float. Okay, so floating numbers, besides integers and floats, besides the complex things that happen behind the scenes, the important thing to keep in mind when you're just learning Python is that a float includes something after a decimal, right? So if I have an integer, for example, 34 is an integer, but 34.5 is a float. I'm not going to get into the differences between floats and integers. I just want you to know that that those are 2 different ways of storing a number. Okay, cool. So that's nice. That's awesome. We can do some simple math. We can also multiply. Okay, so big number equals number times 34. That's great. So we're having fun.